Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 657. I'm Tom Cagley, your host. In this podcast, I talked to Søren Pedersen. We talked about teams, value streams, and leveraging Agile to improve how teams deliver value. We started with the definition of team and then got into the practical nitty-gritty of defining value streams and coaching teams. Søren is the co-founder of BuildingBetterSoftware, a strategic leadership consultant and an international speaker. With more than 15 years of software development experience, he knows how to help businesses meet their digital transformation goals. Using Agile methodology, he helps leaders achieve organizational efficiency, alignment, performance improvement, while building team empowerment so that they feel confident in engaging with leadership, find managerial balance, and can focus on building better software. Are you ready to talk Agile? It's time for the interview. Søren Pedersen, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Hi, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here.
Always look forward to talking with people that not only lead companies, but actually get involved in Agile coaching and consulting sort of world. Today, I'd like to, I think, focus on teams and value streams, those sorts of areas. Let's start with something real simple just to sort of level set the listeners. Teams, that's a common topic that almost everybody in Agile talks about. Everybody seems to define teams a little differently. When you use the term team, what do you mean by team?
So I think in my mind, a team is a group of people who are really able to solve a problem end to end for a customer. And I guess in that sense, I look at it in a slightly broader perspective. So some teams might be purely engineering teams or scrum teams that do some technical stuff, but I really like to engage the customer end part a lot more than others prefer at times, and bring those into the spot and bring their ideas and knowledge to the table with the team. And secondly, I sometimes see that people leave a bit to QA in the end as well. And I really think that needs to go into the team a lot stronger than we're seeing at times right now. So a cohesive group who can solve something end to end in a business context and deliver results.
And there are a couple of things I'd like to explore in a little greater detail in there. But before we get to that, I run into teams, or at least things that people call teams, and every individual is doing something different and there's no cohesion. What would you call that?
I would call that silos in the team, right? So I often see that type of team setup as well. Maybe you've defined your team as 7 to 8 people or something like that, but you have everything split out in 2 to 3 people. So you have sub-teams within. And when you start working with that from an Agile perspective, in my view at least, you get a fragmented team, and it really ruins the way you're working as a team. So you have no collaboration across the sub-teams, and they're really just talking within the small groups, and the rest of the team, the big team, is disconnected from what's going on. And I think that's kind of a big challenge in many companies, because they don't know how to sort the cross-functionality in a team context, really. And that's kind of difficult as well.
I think you're absolutely right that it tends to be predominantly a big company kind of issue. Small companies probably can't afford the luxury of inefficiency by doing it that way. But why do you think that's such a difficult problem to break down?
So the teams I see where people really are bundled up like this is where you get all the leftovers or the small systems or things you really couldn't fit anywhere. And you put those together in a context and try to build a team setting around that and make the whole Agile thing work. And what I think they need to consider is, right, when you do that, do an effort. Make an effort to make sure the team actually comes together and you spread the knowledge across the team so you can start collaborating. Usually when I've been leading tool teams, for instance, a guy would be really good at the version control stuff, a guy would be a build guy and so on, and they'd be really like, yeah, I'm not doing that stuff. But I'm always pushing them to say, yeah, okay, but you are a team and you somehow need to span the entire value chain together so we can move fast on one topic at a time and then switch between. But also always retaining the lead competence, right? So the guy who's really brilliant at something shouldn't feel that he's being devalued in that process, really. They need to have that kind of ownership as well. But that can be a lengthy discussion and piece of work as a leader to get around that problem.
Agreed. And many times leaders, because they're successful and because they were successful in that mold, tend to find it hard to make that kind of change. As someone who helps leaders make that change, obviously your advice is to not do that, right? Doctor, it hurts when I raise my arm. Don't raise your arm. But what would be a way of helping a leader see that what they've done in the past isn't necessarily the best way?
That's a really good question. I think there are no firm type of leader. They're all different, right? They're all people, and you see them act differently. But usually it takes a while where they are part of the team. So when you are a leader, you're not set aside from the team, in my mind. You're actually a part of the team to some extent. You are not doing micromanagement and you're not being controlling in that sense, but you have to observe and be part and walk around the floors. And I usually take them for those walks, and then I have a discussion and talk about, okay, what are we seeing here? What are the team dynamics you observe when the guys are together, or the team is together, right? And then we discuss what the pros and cons are. And some of the cons that often come up is that, yeah, but we don't want 2 people or 3 people doing this stuff because it's really just a one-man job for now, and so on. And then we work that philosophy and discuss why we want to share responsibility and why we want to build team cohesion for future performance. And obviously to eliminate risk. When should somebody leave, then you could be in a pinch, really. And then they become key staff in your organization you're afraid of handling, actually. I don't know if you've had that problem.
No, unfortunately, I have had that problem. I've unfortunately seen it in organizations. I've unfortunately been in organizations as a team lead and a manager, and before I was enlightened, probably caused that problem myself. So, yeah, that's a tough problem. Early on, you mentioned integrating and bringing customer ideas and knowledge into the team.
Mm-hmm.
How and why is that important?
So if you look a bit back in history, and I suppose a lot of the foundation for the DevOps movement as well, and the Agile movement, I'm guessing it's getting 2 decades old already. Mm-hmm. It's in the 90s, right?
Yeah.
They really wanted to deliver working software. And I strongly believe in that point of view. But still, when you observe what is going on in the market space and you see the features that are coming out and projects failing, you realize that they don't really know what the customer wants. They don't have that information. And my viewpoint has always been, the further I can get that knowledge into the team actually making decisions, the more qualified solutions they'll do for their customers, the more transparency they'll have. And I've been fortunate to see companies, and the one I'm at right now, where they actually have product owners that are customers within the organization, which is pretty cool.
Wow.
If you ask me. But it comes with a set of challenges as well, obviously. But that's working really well, and you get a fast feedback loop going, changing your product to what's actually needed in the market, and getting rid of some of the assumptions that really ruins your work.
What would some of the potential downsides of incorporating true customers as product owners?
Yeah. So in software engineering, you need to know a bit about software craftsmanship, if you ask me. This is a measurement podcast, and you have a whole series on what you should measure and how you should measure. And coming from a business side, you usually don't have that kind of knowledge, right? So what tends to become an issue or be a potential issue that the product owner doesn't take into consideration of technical depth, quality measures, and so on. They have a lot of emphasis on features getting out to the market space. And that is obviously important, but it's not really balancing the value proposition you're making. And that is something you need to make sure that you have in control. because when you don't control your quality, your pace of delivering features and the quality of what you put out is going to ruin your business, basically. Or at least it's a very high risk.
And even if it's nothing catastrophic, it becomes sort of an anchor, right? It slows everything down, makes everything cost a little bit more, and then that sort of grows and grows and grows. Why is that such a hard conversation? So they don't, so someone might not have that knowledge immediately, but and maybe we've been too close to it for too long. Shouldn't that become pretty self-evident, pretty obvious very quickly?
But I think, yeah, it should. But I think it's one of the really hard things to point out. So just a few days ago, I had a really good discussion with some people where they said, okay, so when do you have too much technical depth, right? Or depth in your solution? And I'm like, yeah, that really kind of matters, right? Because you always have the business pressure for more features, and you always have the engineers wanting to perfect the product so it's easy to maintain and deliver and of a high quality. And that kind of balance is often also based a bit on gut feeling. We have a lot of good measurements. We have some really cool insights, but still you have to make a judgment call. And depending on who's the strong part in that decision, you might go one or the other way. So I think that's really hard. And furthermore, software is quite complicated for people who's not in the field. So if you're coming from a sector which is very different, it's like, wow, what's going on here, right? And some guy makes a simple programming mistakes, making a comparison instead of an assignment or something, and stuff blows up, right? Who would imagine?
Yeah, unless you have some background in it. You also brought up the idea of value chains. Value chains, again, they're probably like teams. Everybody has a little bit different definition, whether it's, the folks down in Boulder with SAFe have a definition, just lots of definitions. I will be pragmatic and say I think they're all right. They just don't all fit a specific circumstance. How are you using the idea of value stream, and how do you define it?
So typically they span around business areas where I'm part of this, right? So if you have a part of the business providing a service or product to the market, we build a value stream around that part of the company. And we make value streams that cover the entire company side on side. And I think that is okay, but at times it's also challenging, right? Because what do you do when you get to the parts that are really shared in the organization, and how do you make that mesh come together in the end, right?
Yeah.
You really want a good, nice, stable platform behind it all, but then your value streams build on top of that. And then it gets a bit blurry what's a value stream and what is not. But usually solved by using a sub-supplier mentality or concept.
So just to draw that out and maybe make it more apparent to the listeners, if you're working in a software development organization that's building software and delivering that software as part of their product, software you could see as directly part of the value stream. You're not developing software that is part of the product. You're there just to clean the employee gym. That's your software, is scheduling people to clean the employee's gym. Is that part of the value chain? Where does that support piece fit?
Yeah, and I don't think it's part of the product value chain as such. I'd build a value chain next to it. But I think one mistake, or one thing I'd like to see come out more often, is that they assume a customer view of the organization. So you might at times get central departments who are building tools, or, as you said, cleaning the gym is a good example, the scheduling. But they don't see the business as customers. And that mindset I would like to stress out that people should have as well. So rather than having an external consumer customer focus, you have an internal customer focus of your deliveries. And then you actually just maintain the same kind of methodology and work process, in my mind. In one company, I took over a department where I really saw that team had grown into itself. And the first thing we did was to assume a view of the rest of the business as our customers and start doing frequent visits and collect requirements and have that kind of workflow as you'd see in an ordinary product or value stream, I should say. But I put those outside.
How did that change that team?
First of all, the team changed from being focused on being very engineering correct and specific, and we have to have the best tech, and shifted into a mindset where the technology had to solve a lot more problems in the business, which was really good for the business and for the team. So that's a big transition to make. Now you're not just there to engineer some tool stack and the customers will just have to buy it. You're actually trying to build something that matters to people. And that shifted a whole lot of focus. It also changed the entire portfolio of application they offered, because suddenly they saw that the application were not for them, but they're trying to solve a problem in the organization.
Overall, do you think that team morale and cohesiveness also improved, or is that an unknown?
Yeah, for sure. Because when you get, I think it's a bit rude to call it self-absorbed, but I guess that's what kind of happens to people at that point. You don't feel that you're serving anyone anymore. You're basically, and you might be mighty proud of what you're doing engineering-wise and the work you're actually achieving. But the benefit of providing somebody else with a result or a good offering is actually hugely rewarding for many people. And I think a lot of people in the IT industry really wants to be part of that delivery, right?
Absolutely.
And they also get a lot closer to the people and the network where they have to deliver features. And that also builds a lot of bridges and good connections in that sense.
No, that is. And I wouldn't have gone down the path mentally of thinking them as self-absorbed, but that is a very appropriate description of an inward focused team and the change of that helped them get away from that. I actually think that I don't think that was rude at all. I think that was a very valuable observation. Teams, go back to teams for a few seconds. Teams in many organizations, and especially organizations that still live in a very matrixed approach, tend to cross-cut multiple products or cross-cut multiple value streams. I have the distinct impression that that's not the most effective approach. I'd like to get your opinion as to this cross-cutting approach.
Yeah, for sure. And I agree on that part with you. When you see that happening, you usually see a lot of task switching and things going on where you're being really inefficient. And I guess we talked a bit about Tom and Mary Poppendieck in the beginning. That would be on the top list of waste in an organization where you're doing this kind of behavior, right? And secondly, it's really hard to build a team because when you are moving out of your context into a product line or wherever you're going to help out, you're not having any team collaboration or team connection. Then you're more of an assembly of people with similar skills, and all the team spirit has to be built around something that is inside your team, and yet not a major delivery externally. And that's a huge challenge from my perspective, at least. And I strongly recommend that people don't do this stuff anymore, whether they want to do a kind of matrix way or whatever. Still look to build long-lasting teams that get through the different team-building phases.
Heidi Heflin would argue that while we all see the value of long-lived teams, the teams tend to be much more dynamic. And maybe it's just a focus on a different sort of dynamicism. People come, people go. And that's especially in an up job market. When you use the term long-lived teams, is it the team and some central core? How dynamic is bad in your mind, and how static is good? That was a horrible question, by the way.
That is a really good one, I'd say. It's not horrible per se.
Okay.
So I think there's a big difference in having a team which is built for being split out in different product lines and different contexts, and then having a team which is cohesive and focused on delivering a certain offering, right? So that's important to distinguish in my mind, at least. Then in terms of how dynamic that should and could and should not be, I think you need to have a stable core of 3 or 4 people that actually stays for 2 to 5 years. I kind of like the way Kim Scott put it in the book Radical Candor, where she called these, I believe she calls them rock stars, but they're really the bedrock of the team. They're doing a really, really solid job, and they're sticking around, and they're not trying to advance and that kind of stuff. But as a company, you really want these guys in there. And then you can have people going in and out of the team for all I care. On the other end, you asked how static should they be? I think being too static is actually a challenge. You want some new blood to come in to poke at your old ideas and try to move you a bit along the path, because otherwise you might get stuck in some of the paradigms and things you do. And if you never change people, then you're going to have a very static team, which is doing the same, and then probably the market space will outcompete you because you're not moving. So a fixed core, which stays around for years, is really good. And then a slight degree of flow around it. I think that's cool.
People hear words and sort of the idea of long-lived teams, and people glom on to the idea that perhaps it should never change, and that any change is like throwing a boulder in the middle of a lake. Some change is absolutely necessary. I agree 100%. If you were to look at teams and value streams, should a team be able to take work from inception all the way through the value chain? Is there some degree of handoffs that's required, especially in complex projects or products?
Yeah. I think the latter part is reality for now, at least. We know that, and you probably have talked to somebody about this as well, that when teams grow beyond a certain size, they become unmanageable, right? You get too many communication points and it just is unmanageable. So somehow you need to sort out how you're going to handle the flow in the value stream and create as least handoffs as possible, because they, again, are waste in your organization. And I think the tendency I've tried to approach this with is to build platform teams beneath. So if we'd see a generic problem with form, we'd try to solve that with a team that is mainly focused on solving that. And then again, assume the customer focus in your organization. So maybe in this particular value stream of the organization, you're building a component you could actually sell across more value streams because you're solving a generic problem, potentially, and then try to do it in that manner. It could also be that what they're doing resembles something you could find in the market and then build a team around that. But it's really difficult.
Do concepts like DevOps change the approach?
In what sense do you mean?
Before we embraced DevOps, there probably were some specialist teams that might be required. The integration of shifting the whole idea of things like security and integration and builds and all of that left. Has that changed the approach to delivering value through value streams?
Oh, yeah, massively. In the context where I was in Lego, we actually had a really cool guy on the security part. So rather than building a center of excellence or a department of security experts, they actually assumed the opposite approach, where the teams were able to do the security assessments, they're coached and trained and so on, and a risk profile was applied. So when they did new software, they'd have to assess and report back to this guy. So you're actually reversing the pattern of how decisions are made in that context and pushing it to the team side. The integration part is, from my experience, usually solved with an architectural paradigm instead, where you assume a different way of developing your software. And that, of course, also follows the DevOps principles of decoupled architecture. We try to assume a mindset where we saw everybody as external in the organization. And that might sound a bit crazy, But what it meant was that all data and all functionality was deployed as APIs and maintained as if they were external parties receiving the software, putting pretty strict or high requirements towards the deliveries within the company. And that made them really consumable by other teams and knowable.
Wow. That's a fantastic idea. Søren, this has been really, really marvelous, and I'm really thrilled that we've had this conversation. If you woke up tomorrow morning, somebody handed you a cup of coffee or whatever your caffeinated beverage of choice is, and they gave you a magic wand and said you had the power to change any two things that affect how work is done in organizations, what two things would you change?
The first thing I would change is kind of big, but I want to change the way budget and structures are done financially in companies. That is, in my experience, a tremendous roadblock for creating performance and efficiency in organizations. It is still pulling in the old taylorism and challenging a lot of stuff that we're trying to do. And the second part I do is to put a much higher emphasis on learning and evolving people in the organization, because they are the blood of what you're doing. And if they don't thrive and grow, then you are stuck as a company.
How can people continue the conversation? How can they reach out, find you?
Oh, yeah, they're welcome to reach out on LinkedIn and hook up and ask questions, and I'm always available.
As you know, at this point, I open up the platform for you to promote anything that you'd like. As a reminder, this has been around for 15 years, so think broad. My intent is that it's around for another 15.
So my company is a quite young and small company. It's called BuildingBetterSoftware for a reason, because we believe that things should be done slightly different in the market space. And the problem we're trying to solve is the misalignment between management and grassroots in the organization. And that is usually challenging your agile transformation and making it unwieldy. And unfortunately, we see a lot of companies failing because they have big intentions. But when it comes to delivering, it's really hard to align those two axes.
Well, super. And your company website is?
BuildingBetterSoftware.com.
Yeah, simple and to the point. Søren, this has been absolutely marvelous. Thank you for spending time with the Software Process and Measurement Cast listeners.
Likewise, it's been a pleasure.
In Reread Saturday News, this week I am hiking in the woods without my laptop, albeit I do have my copy of Monotasking by Stefan Notenberg. I am continuing to focus on using shortlists, which has been a fairly easy transition, and also implementing both panorama queues and panorama sessions. The panorama queues and sessions have been useful up to the point that my diary becomes wall-to-wall meetings. I'm trying to devise an approach for using panorama sessions in this scenario. Suggestions? While out in the woods, I have republished a summary of one of the most popular rereads, The Goal. We'll be back to Monotasking by Stefan Notenberg next week. In the next Software Process and Measurement Cast, we will feature an essay on prioritization. The order work is done is a reflection of priority. There is often a difference between assigned priority and the real priority based on when teams start and complete a piece of work. We'll also have a visit to the QA Corner with Jeremy Barrio. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?